Today I want to welcome HR Huntsman. He's the founder of Your Leader's Edge. It is a executive coaching and business strategy organization. HR has been able to invest in leaders, especially young leaders, and it all ties back to kind of his founding story, where he came from, and we're going to go into that, but it's really powerful. And now he shares many of life and leadership principles he's learned over 30 years of leadership with other leaders. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. HR, welcome.
Greg, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invitation, my friend.
Yeah. So you're based out in Washington, and did you grow up in Washington?
No, I grew up in southern New Mexico, actually. Got to Washington via the Air Force.
Where in southern New Mexico?
So I was born in Tularosa, New Mexico, which almost no one knows where it is. And my childhood was in Alamogordo, right outside of White Sands, and where the Trinity Site nuclear test facility was. And then in my junior high and high school years, moved up the mountains to Ruidoso, New Mexico. That's where I graduated high school.
I've never been there. I've really wanted to go. I think they had some fires followed by some flooding this year that
That's right.
probably should say I make me wait a few more years as they kind of rebuild things.
That's right. My hometown was devastated first by fire, then by flood, for sure.
Yeah. So maybe you can settle this dispute. My wife and I disagree about how that town's name is pronounced. I want to call it Ruidoso. She says, no, it's Ruidosa.
So white people are going to say ruidoso. Locals are going to say ruidoso.
Uh-huh. Yeah. From everything I see, it's like this little gem in the mountains. It's got, not that far north of the Mexican border, and you guys have a ski site.
Absolutely. It's a gorgeous place. I love it. I spent a ton of time in the mountains there. Yeah, we have Ski Apache. It's called Ski Apache now, 12,003 feet. It's the tallest mountain in the Southern Rockies. Ruidoso itself is 7,000 feet. I mean, it's half a mile above Denver. We got champion, quarter horse racing there. So it's a fantastic, beautiful little town.
Wow. Yeah. And hmm. No, I've got to make it out there. It sounds gorgeous. And it's also where Billy the Kid's from, right? When he and
Right.
those
Yeah. Lincoln is about 30 minutes from Ruidoso. That's where he was held in the courthouse. He shot his way out of it. The whole Lincoln County Wars, that's all a part of my history for sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like an enchanting place, but you didn't necessarily have an enchanting childhood.
No, actually, I didn't. And my childhood has become formative both in my personal life and in my career. So I grew up in a pretty dysfunctional, alcoholic, abusive home filled with anger. My biological dad died when he had his first stroke when I was 9 months old, and his second stroke when I was 9 years old. I found him dead in the backyard, and there's
Oh
all
my
kinds of
goodness.
men in and out of my life. He lived with us for those, 8+ years. My mom took care of him while she remarried and had two other boys with my first stepdad. So that was just a weird, looking back on it, just a weird, strange situation. I didn't know he was my dad until after he passed away. Mom said that was actually your dad that lived with us all that time. And so, as you can imagine, there was this big hole where a healthy stepfather, where a healthy dad should be. Several stepfathers, all kinds of men in and out of my life. And the reason this is key is because I entered the Air Force because I was told kids like you don't go to college. We were really poor. I was called white trash and trailer trash most of my childhood. And so I went to the military. I was a fairly sharp kid. I was good in computer programming. It's back when computers were just hitting desktops. And anyway, there I met Chaplain John Simmons. He was a captain at the time, retired to lieutenant colonel. And he was the first powerful, positive male role model I had in my life. And he showed me how to be a good dad and a good husband. And he's the one that convinced me that I had something to give and I had potential. And from those formative years, I started my first company when I was 28, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to make the world a better place and take some of that pain and invest in young people and invest in the generations coming behind me. That's why I love your podcast, Leadership and Legacies. Those are both passions of mine. So that's how my childhood formed what I'm doing now and the philosophy that I bring to life.
Yeah. There's a couple thoughts that come to mind. One is just the difference between you being in the Air Force, me being in the Marines. When you said a chaplain and he was a captain, I'm immediately picturing an '06, somebody with, Eagles on his,
Okay.
because in the Marine Corps, all the chaplains were Navy. And so
Uh,
Navy captain is, a
oh, got
colonel
it,
in
got
any
it.
other
Sure.
branch.
Okay, got it.
But the other thing that really just stood out to me is, this is an election year. And, half the country's saying we're doomed if we don't get, this one guy. The other half is saying we're doomed if we don't get, the other party. And I believe, I truly believe that if fathers would spend more time investing in their kids, we could make more change in this country than any politician could ever make for us.
I believe, and I say this to all my clients every time I have the opportunity to get on stage, the greatest waste in human history is the waste of human potential. And acting where you are, beginning with the people in your home and acting with kindness and investing in them and believing in them. And then your next sphere of influence, maybe that's at work or neighbors or close family friends. And for us that have developed maybe even a larger circle of sphere of influence and business leaders and regional and national leaders, beginning one sphere of influence at a time, Craig, and investing in those people and bringing out the best in them. I agree with you. That's the best way to change the world.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I'm going to be voting when the election comes around, but for us to put our hopes in Washington, as opposed to, I think we can move the world so much more if we start locally.
I agree fully. I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
beginning with your kids, beginning with your marriage, beginning with your nieces and nephews and cousins, and then extending to, in my case, the young leaders around that I get to work with. I get to change the world one young leader at a time, and I'm honored to do so because someone gave that to me.
Yeah.
It's directly because of what John did for me that he said, H, when you get to the chance you get to give this back, brother, you better give it back. And so here I am.
What would you say are the top three lessons that you learned from him that stuck with you?
Probably what I said already, that the greatest waste in the world is human potential, to realize everyone has an opportunity to do something meaningful, to do something powerful, to live a best life. So trying to bring greatness out of people and help people embrace the best part of their life as a business leader, in one-to-one coaching. So that's probably number one, is that everyone has potential, everyone has value. Number two would probably be the power of gratitude. I grew up in a victim complaining, angry house, and I've tried to break from that and have broken from that. The life that I lead is 180 degrees different than the life I was handed. And it's fueled by gratitude, and then probably is generosity, give back, have a generous mindset, have a generous spirit with your words, beginning with your words, with your attitude, with your actions, your time, finances. I'd say those are probably the three biggest lessons I've tried to carry forward.
Okay, so everybody has potential,
Yep.
have a heart of gratitude
Yep.
and
Generosity.
generosity. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, you bet.
Everybody has potential, have a heart of gratitude and be generous.
Yep.
The second one that you touch on is, there's a lady named Joellen Demetrius who used to be a jury consultant, and her claim to fame is she picked the O.J. Simpson jury. And
Wow.
she said one of the biggest things that she looks for when she's picking jurors is she tries to figure out, are they ahead of where they expected to be in life, or are they behind where they expected to be in life? And in that is that gratitude that you were talking about.
Yeah. Interesting.
And she said those that are behind where they expected tend to have victim mentalities. They tend to be mean, unforgiving, ungracious,
Uh-huh.
and just, loathsome people, and
Yeah.
she boots them off the jury.
I can see that. Yeah, I can see that. And the leaders that I work with are having gratitude and a generous spirit. They're the best learners. They're still humble. They're willing to admit mistakes. They're willing to own up to things. They tend to be the most pliable when it comes to learning new things about business and life and leadership development and family. I think it shapes the way we look at life and how we look at the future.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, those were some powerful lessons to learn as a young man. And so, did you stay in the Air Force for a long term, or did you get out and move on?
No, got out, moved on. I was heading toward an electronics engineering degree because of John. I decided to change everything and I started my first company when I was 28. And being a multimillionaire was no longer the goal. It was really world. I wanted to change the world. So I started my first company. It was a nonprofit humanitarian organization and eventually grew it to be very large and got to travel the world and worked in Uganda and Kenya and India and all through Mexico and here in the States, doing all kinds of projects and building orphanages and drilling wells and vegetable gardens and food projects and medical stuff. And we followed hurricanes and rebuilt homes and built counseling centers and all kinds of cool stuff that I'm pretty proud of.
That's amazing. Now, at some point, and so you've had your leader's edge for 30 years, but in there, you also became a Vistage chair.
So I started Leader's Edge after I retired. So I retired from that company when I was 50, my first company. And that's when I decided to focus solely on leaders. And that's when I started Leader's Edge. I've been growing businesses for 30 years, but Leader's Edge is the second half of my professional career.
Okay. Now, and am I right that you were at some point, were you a Vistage member or a Vistage chair, or?
A chair for a short time. Yeah.
Yeah. So first off, for those that don't know, what is Vistage? What's a Vistage chair? What does all that mean?
Vistage is a worldwide organization that helps develop leaders, and these are usually business owners, small business owners, or large C-suite executives that come together once a month in a mastermind kind of format, a peer-to-peer format where they challenge each other, hear stories, share ideas, frustrations about business. It's a place where they can talk about things they probably wouldn't talk about anyplace else and help each other grow their companies and their leadership. It's a really good organization.
My nickname for it's always, or nickname, or the way I've described it to people is it's a board of directors that can't fire you.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good place to grow and be challenged and to be accountable to.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the challenges that I think, I love the concept of having a board of directors. These are supposed to be advisors from a diverse background that help you run your C corporation.
Uh-huh.
But I think what happens in reality is when you go into these board meetings, you realize, as a CEO, you're basically one board meeting away from being fired. You say the wrong thing in front of the board, or you ask the wrong question, and they lose confidence. And next thing you know, you're out of a job.
Yeah, that's
And
true.
so, what structurally should be a board of advisors is really missing. And that's one of the things I really like about Vistage is the confidentiality that's there, where you can ask these questions. You have a diverse group of people that can share insight and give you ideas to work through problems.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed for sure.
Yeah. So, so you did that in combination with Leader's Edge.
Yeah, I was more passionate about, like, I have my own peer-to-peer group as well, but I was more passionate about working with teams. Again, my background is developing teams and building leaders. So I really focus on business strategy and team development, which isn't really Visage's strong suit. That's not what their focus is. So I wanted to focus Leaders Edge more on those areas of working with executive teams, going in and developing, working on systems, developing accountability protocols, mission, vision, value type stuff. So whole whole company or whole team integration is what I'm really passionate about and what Leaders Edge is really doing well.
Wow. And And that's really interesting. So, I mean, obviously, I know a number of people that have joined Vestige for, for the various benefits. What is what would you say are the biggest things they're missing? Obviously, what you're saying from the team perspective, but what is it that so ignites your passion about addressing the whole team that fails to be addressed in Vestige? What does it mean to the business?
What it means to the business is greater buy-in, greater collaboration, greater creative conflict, all the things that we believe are essential and necessary to grow healthy organizations, what we call destination workplaces. And so we absolutely are passionate, again, all through the first 25 years of my own company. Developing those teams became my great love. So going when ABC Inc. invites us in to work with their team and help them develop systems and build leadership infrastructure and work through accountability processes and document a strategy, getting to do that with the top 12 or 15 people as opposed to just a single CEO, it's just far, far more impactful to the organization.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, there's the obvious, but what's missing? Because conceivably you could advise a CEO,
Sure,
hey, you need to go do these things. But I believe you when you say working with the entire team is more impactful. I believe that.
sure.
Why is it more impactful?
Why is it more impactful working with the team, or why doesn't the CEO just do it?
As opposed to why is it more impactful when you go in and work with the entire team as opposed to working with the CEO and saying, okay, here's what you need to do? Because conceivably, you could kind of wind up the CEO and turn him loose to go do the
Sure,
same processes that you're doing,
sure.
but you're getting
Cons-
bigger results when you work with the entire team as
oh,
opposed to giving him direction.
much bigger, and for several different reasons. Number one is that's not what his training is. He's not trained to do those things. That's typically not a CEO's background. They're focused on the specific focus of that organization. They tend to be putting out fires every day and holding meetings and doing reports. They're not trained in organizational psychology and organizational development and organizational strategy. We are this surgical team that this is what we do every single day of our lives. So we're very, very good at it. So we get to come in like a surgery team and help quickly coalesce and collaborate and have good, healthy conflict. And most CEOs, frankly, aren't very good at. And we get to teach the teams how to do this in a safe space. And us being outsiders is actually a tremendous advantage because we bring, tons of experience with us and working with dozens and dozens of companies. So that outsider perspective is actually an advantage to those that are in the weeds every single day. So it has a tremendous impact that it would take a CEO far, far longer to do on their own.
And I see that in my own business and not only in my own business, but my own specialty. So I do marketing for other folks,
Right.
but I have tremendous blind spots when it comes to my own marketing. And so I actually reach out to other people. I've got two people speaking into my life right now who are looking at my company and making huge differences to my own marketing because of my own blind spots.
Sure.
And so I would see the same thing from a leadership perspective. Even the most powerful and dynamic leader must have blind spots.
Oh, of course they do. Blind spots. And there's going to be a certain culture that's already developed that we get to, as outsiders, come in and interrogate with fresh eyes. Not only does the CEO have blind spots, the entire executive team has blind spots, or the leadership team has blind spots, and we get to come in and interrogate that, and it offers them a fresh look at how they do business. I mean, I could take your same example. You're a marketing expert. Why don't you just teach the CMO of this huge corporation how to do marketing?
Right.
Rather than you come in, right? It's not that easily transferable because this is what you do every single day of your life with multiple companies. So it's not as easily transferable as it hypothetically sounds like it could be.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one of the things that you were talking about, you've said this a couple times, is conflict. And conflict's a really interesting thing. And if I think about a scale, on one side of the scale, we have Apple, a place of extreme, at least previously, of extreme conflict.
Okay.
And on the other end of the scale, we have my first company out of college, Ericsson. It was a Swedish company, like the most passive aggressive culture on the face of the earth,
Okay. All right.
where there was never conflict. And and I've seen powerful arguments on both sides. What's the role of conflict in a company and how does it look?
So there's basically, when you talk about organizational psychology or just psychology in general, there's basically two kinds of conflict. There's relationship conflict when you and I disagree on politics or the fact that you stole my meatloaf out of the fridge last week or you parked in my spot and I don't like you. So there's relationship conflict or personality conflict. And then there's conflict over ideas. So it's a conflict over ideas that we try to mine everywhere we go. Personality conflict is almost always unhealthy and it creates a terrible culture that is psychologically unsafe. Conflict over ideas is what we try to propagate and instigate and actually inflame. And most companies aren't good about this because they're afraid of the relationship kind of conflict. So they avoid idea conflict. So we separate the two and we help them build a culture where we can have good, respectful disagreements over ideas that can move the company forward and move the ball down the field in a way that doesn't hurt our relationship at all. So companies that avoid all kinds of conflict are avoiding idea conflict or what we call creative conflict, and they're leaving innovation, creativity, and profits on the table by doing so.
Wow. How do you structure that? How do you, what's the structure for building a culture of encouraging idea conflict?
It's all about curiosity and asking really good questions. Craig, what we've learned and what we teach everywhere we go is this idea of leadership by inquiry. And if you want really good creative conflicts, is by asking questions. What could we do? Let's take marketing. What would a great marketing campaign look like? How would it look differently than what we're doing now? Where are we not working? What kind of key metrics do we need to look at that we're not looking at now? Those kinds of questions, they stir debate rather than, Craig, you're dropping the ball in marketing and you're not hitting your numbers. Those tend to bring up defensiveness, whereas inquiry and curiosity allows good, healthy debate. So what we teach is to fill the room with good, open-ended questions.
Yeah. For me, I know I've struck gold when I hear a client say, that's not how that's done in our industry, or that will never work, or just one of these broad blanket statements that tries to dismiss an idea.
Sure.
It's for me, it's like finding a rock, turning it over, and finding gold hidden under that rock.
For sure. For sure.
So how's that look like for you when you're going into organizations? What are the similar type statements that you hear?
Yeah,
And what is the gold you find?
we hear those same things. And again, curiosity and inquiry, they're part of the hallmark and the framework of how we approach everything we do. So I would just approach those. It sounds like there's some fear there or some scar tissue there. Tell me about that. And I'd have them tell me the story of how's that worked in the past and what they tried and what would be the shame of trying that again or what might look different. If you were to design that differently, how would you design it? So I would just pepper them with all kinds of questions. I wouldn't react to the initial rock thrown into the window. I would just respond with all kinds of questions that would help them begin to see it from a different angle rather than dismissing it outright.
Yeah. No, and that's good. I like that because when, they sort of threw the rock through the window when they said that won't work or that's not
Correct.
how it's done.
Yeah.
And if you respond by throwing a rock through their window, that's going to escalate things in an unhealthy way.
Yeah. They'll just dig in their heels. That approach never works. You try to convince someone up front, they're just going to dig in their heels and stick with their position, whatever it is. That's just the human nature. But inviting people to explore different ideas and helping them travel down little trails, and let's look at this trail, and what does this little trail look like? That kind of inquiry aids the person to take down some of those defensive walls of ego and fear, and allow them to take a little bit of journey and say, well, I never saw it from that angle before. I think we can explore that. And those that when I see those light bulbs go off, that's the real goal right there.
Yeah. Yeah, I bet. You know, on the subject of conflict, here's a real life example from Apple. The original iPhone was not supposed to have a SIM card. And that was an edict put out by Johnny Ive and Steve Jobs. It's like, yep, no SIM card. And that came out. But something in Steve Jobs' leadership, one, to rise up to the upper echelons of Apple, you had to be really, really good, and you had to be able to present your point. But Tony Fadell, who was running the iPhone project, tells a story of how he confronted Steve, and he did it with data, and he basically showed all the networks in the world that required SIM cards, and he's like, Steve, we're going to take all of these off the table if you get rid of the SIM card. What do you want to do? And he was able to change Steve Jobs' mind.
Yeah.
But that required creating that culture
Yeah.
where he knew he could confront Steve Jobs and not get fired, which was kind of a precarious thing in that organization.
For sure. Especially Jobs 1.0. Imagine trying to tell Steve Jobs 1.0 that he's wrong about the SIM card and just butting heads with him just on the premise itself. You're going to lose, right?
Yeah.
You're going to lose that debate. And so when we go to these organizations, we find helping them look at innovation and creativity and conflict through the lens of creative conflict and idea conflict. We have tremendous results because of that approach.
Now, you just said something that flew over the head of many. I mean, and it makes complete sense to somebody who studies leadership every day.
Okay, what's that?
Steve 1.0. What's
Yeah.
Steve 1.0 versus Steve 2.0? What's that mean, and why does that matter?
So this is just from my knowledge of Steve, which is obviously remote, just things I've read. Obviously, I never met him, but what I've read about 1.0, very dictatorial, my way, highway, very rigid, very tough on people. When he got fired from his own company, when the board let him go, there was a reorganization. There were some vulnerabilities, a little bit of humility. When he was then hired back as Steve 2.0, there was some softness that had come around with him by all accounts that I have read. And Steve 2.0 was more open to debate and to dialogue and to healthier conflict, and wasn't nearly as dictatorial as 1.0 was. Is that your take as well? You may know as much or more about him than I do.
Yeah, I think that's my impression as well. There's still some unanswered questions in my mind about Steve Jobs. Um, there's a lot of lack of resolution. I don't view him as a great humanitarian,
Sure.
a genius marketer who had many flaws.
Of
And,
course.
and I think and the reason I'm bringing that up is for any leader that's listening, of course you have flaws. We all do. And if Steve Jobs can go from one point of the guy who gets fired from his own company to the guy who built one of the most profitable companies and one of the most valuable companies on earth,
Yes,
we can all do this.
that's right. I agree with that.
And I think as we kind of wind things up here, as we bring it back, it does come back to this concept of conflict that you talked about. You know, I've got somebody that works for me who was reviewing some things I put together, and I sent her version 1. She says, I can't figure this out. This doesn't make sense. So I go back and I work on it. Version 2, I can't figure this out. It doesn't make sense. Version 3, I can't figure this out. It doesn't make sense. And I mean, this is somebody whose paycheck I sign. I'm so thankful that she has the boldness to tell me that she's seeing something that I'm missing.
That's good. That's good leadership on your part.
And and I think that's, something Steve Jobs eventually came around to saying is we hire smart people not to make decisions for them. We want them to help us make better decisions.
Yeah. Right.
So,
I mean, I work with CEOs and high performing entrepreneurs every day of my life. And I can tell you, Craig, that the ones that are the greatest joy to work with and the ones that see the greatest change are the ones that are still humble enough to say, I don't know everything. They're still willing to learn. They're lifelong learners. They're vulnerable enough to say, can you help me? They're humble enough to say, I don't know that. And these are extremely successful women and men. And they have the humility to be a lifelong learner in their 40s and 50s and 60s. They're not only a joy to work with, but then they exponentially bless the people that follow them. And I love working with leaders that are still learners.
wow. Well, I know we could go another hour. This is just so fascinating, but I mean, if I think about, the, kind of the biggest takeaways here, one is just building that culture of conflict, of healthy conflict,
Yeah,
and making sure the conflict's about the right things.
that's right.
And going back to those lessons you had early on, in the Air Force is everybody has value,
Yeah,
be generous, and be grateful.
right.
For people that want to learn more about this and want to be their own version of their Steve Jobs 2.0, how do they reach you?
Just email me, hr@yourleadersedge.com. I'd love to have a chat with you as a leader. I just want to champion your leaders. I believe that leaders change the world, just like John Simmons did with me. You never know whose life you're going to impact, who can impact the world. So reach out to me. Let's have a chat. You can always go to my website, yourleadersedge.com as well.
Well, that's great. HR, this has been a delight. Thanks for coming on Leaders and Legacies.
Thank you, Craig. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate the time.